The morning I realized my lake had been hit, the water looked wrong too, still too bright, like someone poured something in and walked away smiling. A ribbon of dead fish floated along my dock, and the tanks I'd built with my own hands were suddenly silent. And up the hill, the president of the Homeowners Association stood on a viewing deck with a mug of coffee, watching like this was finally the cleanup she'd been demanding. My name's Ethan Cole, and I moved back to Montana after I got out of the service with a leg that never quite forgave me. I inherited a chunk of land and a small lake, Pine Glass Lake, and I turned it into a sustainable fish operation, part business, part therapy, part keep my head straight. It wasn't some hobby pond. It was my living, my routine, my whole plan. Then Maple Ridge Estates showed up downhill like a glossy brochure come to life. Big homes, trimmed hedges, matching mailboxes, plus a homeowners association that acted like they had jurisdiction over the weather. Their rules didn't stop at their property line either. Not in practice. The first time I met Melissa Hart, she didn't introduce herself like a neighbor. She introduced herself like a citation. Melissa Hart. She said, chin-lifted clipboard tucked under her arm, president of the HOA, and we need to address your situation. My situation was that people liked fishing at my lake, and you could see my docks from certain back patios. Apparently that was a crime against their skyline. Melissa called it visual clutter. She said it like she was talking about a landfill, not a guy trying to make a living. A week later, I got the first letter. Then the second. Then the third. Fines, warnings, compliance deadlines printed on official-looking paper with the HOA logo like they were a government agency. One line stuck with me because it was so blunt it almost felt fake. Cease all fishing activity effective immediately. I walked down to their office and asked, calm as I could, "You realize my property isn't part of your association, right?" Melissa smiled without warmth and leaned in like she was sharing a secret. "Your property affects our property," she said, tapping her pen, "and I protect our values." That's when I learned what protect meant in her world. She started calling county offices, filing complaints, requesting inspections, reporting unpermitted commercial activity. My phone rang with numbers I didn't recognize, and my mailbox became a slot machine that only paid out stress. At first, I tried to do everything the polite way. I pulled my permits, printed my paperwork, highlighted the sections that proved I was legal. I installed extra signage, cleaned up anything that could be twisted into nuisance. I even reduced public hours, even though it cut my income, just to lower the temperature. Melissa didn't want the temperature lower. She wanted me gone. One afternoon I came out to find two guys in tactical-looking vests standing near my fence line like they were auditioning for a low-budget action movie. One held a tablet, the other had a body cam. "Environmental compliance check," the tall one said, like that phrase gave him magical powers. "Who sent you?" I asked. "HOA business," he answered like it was supposed to end the conversation. I told them to leave. They didn't, so I called the sheriff. And when the actual deputy rolled up dusty cruiser, real badge, zero patience. The two compliance guys suddenly remembered they had somewhere else to be. They walked off fast, not even making eye contact, and I stood there staring at the tire tracks like, wow, this is what she's willing to do in daylight. Then she escalated again. Maple Ridge Estates had a public access path that led down toward the lake. Nothing fancy, just a well-used trail people had walked for years. One Saturday morning I drove past and saw a gate, a brand-new no trespassing sign, and two bored-looking guards posted like it was a private concert. Families pulled up with fishing poles, got turned away, and drove off confused. I parked, walked up, and said, "That access isn't yours to block." One of the guards shrugged and pointed at the sign. "We're paid to enforce it." Melissa stepped out from behind the gate like she'd been waiting for her moment. "This isn't personal, Ethan," she said, and I almost laughed because of course she'd say that. "We're simply maintaining order." "Order," I repeated, looking at the gate. "On a public path." She leaned closer. "You bring traffic, noise, liability. If you won't be reasonable, we will." 3 days later, the lawsuit showed up. $50,000. Interference with quiet enjoyment. Diminished property value. More legal language than I'd seen in my life, all aimed at a guy with a busted leg and a fish operation. That night I sat at my kitchen table with the papers spread out and the calculator open like I was doing a funeral budget. I wasn't spiraling into some dramatic identity crisis. I was doing math. How long could I afford a lawyer? How many months before the legal fees ate everything? How many times a person can get punched by paperwork before they stop getting up? And yeah, in the quiet I did think it. What if I'm the problem? Not in a soft, emotional way, more like a cold, practical question. If I pack up and leave, the pressure stops. If I sell, Melissa wins and I get my life back, minus the life I actually wanted. The next morning I almost called a realtor. Instead my phone rang. Ethan Cole, a woman asked. "This is Rachel Diaz. I'm with the local paper. I heard the HOA put up a gate on a public access path, and I'd like to see it." Rachel didn't show up with drama. She showed up with a camera, a notepad, and that calm, sharp energy of someone who doesn't scare easy. We drove to the gate together, and within 10 minutes we watched a dad with 2 kids get turned around while one of the guards said, "Association policy." Rachel raised her eyebrows at me, like, "You seeing this?" Then she stepped forward and asked the guard, sweet as pie, "Can you say that again on camera?" The guard froze like his brain hit an error message. The article hit fast. People started talking. The county got calls. Someone higher up finally said the words I'd been waiting to hear: "You can't block public access." The gate came down a couple days later, and for the first time in weeks I felt air come back into my chest. Melissa didn't apologize. She didn't back off. She just got quieter. And that's what should have scared me more. Because the real hit came at night. I woke up to a weird smell outside, sharp chemical like a pool mixed with something dead. By sunrise I saw the slick on the surface and the fish starting to roll. Not gore, not some horror movie scene, just life fading out of the water like someone turned the power off. I called environmental services. I called the sheriff. I called anyone whose number I had. And while I waited, I did the only thing I could. I pulled my security footage, saved every clip, and took water samples the way my aquaculture mentor taught me. Hands shaking, jaw clenched, moving anyway. That's when Melissa walked up to the edge of her viewing deck again, same coffee mug, same posture. Like she'd scheduled this. "You can't prove anything," she called down. I stared up at her and said loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, "Then why are you here?" She didn't answer. She just turned and went inside. The lab results came back with traces of an algaecide, something strong enough to nuke a bloom, and also strong enough to wreck a living system if someone dumped it like a tantrum. The timing lined up with the slick. My footage showed a vehicle stopping near the shoreline access after midnight. No clear face, but a clean window of time. Rachel dug deeper. And then Dr. Lauren Price, hydrogeologist, the kind of person who talks like facts are bricks, asked one question that changed everything. Where does Maple Ridge get its drinking water? I didn't know. I assumed they were on a municipal line. Dr. Price pulled maps, groundwater flow charts, limestone sink data stuff that looked like another language. Then she pointed to a line that made my stomach drop. Pineglass Lake fed underground channels. Those channels fed the wells downhill, Maple Ridge's wells. Meaning, if Melissa dumped chemicals into my lake to solve her little fishing problem, she didn't just attack my business. She poisoned the pathway to her own neighborhood's drinking water. Suddenly, this wasn't a petty feud. This was a public safety problem with teeth. The Homeowners Association had their annual meeting in a clubhouse that smelled like carpet cleaner and expensive candles. Rows of folding chairs filled with people who looked tired, irritated, and confused about why they were even there. Melissa stood at the front, confident, composed, ready to control the room like always. I walked in with Rachel, Dr. Price, and a folder so thick it felt like armor. Melissa's smile tightened when she saw me. "This meeting is for residents," she said. Rachel held up her press credentials. Dr. Price held up her county consultant badge. I just held up my footage stills and lab reports. "Then you'll want to hear this," I said, and the mic made my voice bigger than my nerves. I didn't rant. I didn't preach. I laid it out step by step. Gate harassment lawsuit, the nighttime dump, the lab results, the groundwater link. Dr. Price explained the flow like she was teaching a class, calm and brutal. Rachel played clips of residents being turned away at the gate, the guard saying "association policy" like it was law. You could feel the room turn. People started whispering, then arguing, then asking questions Melissa didn't have answers for. Melissa tried to take control. "This is speculation," she snapped, voice rising. "He's exaggerating because he wants attention." Dr. Price didn't flinch. "Ma'am, this isn't about attention," she said. "This is about exposure levels and risk. Your residents have been drinking from wells connected to that lake." That's when the county official standing near the back stepped forward. He didn't need a speech. He just said Melissa Hart and held up a document. Melissa blinked like her brain didn't recognize consequences. "What is this?" "An order," he said, "and a request for detainment pending investigation." The room went dead quiet in that awful clean way, like everyone's waiting for the sound that confirms reality. Melissa backed up, bumping into a chair. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "You can't." Two deputies stepped in. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just professional. Final. Melissa's wrists disappeared behind her back, her coffee-colored confidence draining right out of her face. She looked at me like I'd betrayed her, like I was supposed to be the kind of person she could bully forever. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just met her eyes and said, "You used the HOA to control people, and you never checked where the water actually goes." And as they walked her out, the last thing I heard wasn't cheering. It was the sound of a room full of adults realizing they'd handed their power to the wrong person. Lesson: never let someone hide a power trip behind community rules, because sooner or later, reality collects the debt.